Hello peeps, I've got a bit of a request show today. I never get that right. First request show ever. I'll be perfectly honest with you, it was actually from the wife. And she wouldn't know the difference between number 1 and number 2 copper. Now the wife's always saying, you know, what the fuck are you talking about? So it's not really an unusual request, but it is a request. First request show ever. Lovely. Right, here we go. Number 1, number 2 copper. Number 1, number 2. Number 1, number 2. Number 1 copper. It's clean, it's bright, it's shiny. This is what my yard calls number 1 copper. It doesn't have bright and shiny, it's just number 1 copper. Simple as that. Some places they have 3 different levels of it. I don't know that. I'm talking Hertfordshire, Essex, London, south of England. Most really big major scrapyards that buy from the smaller scrapyards class it this way, in my experience. Number 1 copper. Thicker than a paperclip. Number 1 copper. Then we start to get to flex. You know, what's on your Hoover, your vacuum, sorry, your iron, etc, etc. Inside that comes 2 or 3 of these little strands. And inside that is this, what I call hair wire. People call it different things. Now, this is pure copper, but my yard, and most major yards I've ever used in my entire life for the past 37 years I've been scrapping, class this as number 2 copper, not number 1, because it's so small. As you can see, it's like hair, hence hair wire. Their reasoning being, and this is from the scrapyard, I'm not just making this up, I'm not just going on YouTube and looking it up or googling it. My yard says when they come to smelt this hair wire, it's so small, and if it's got any corrosion on it at all, it will literally burn up. It will just turn into a gas. Little bits will burn off, float off with the hot air. They'll lose it. They lose value by smelting this stuff, apparently. Now, if you don't believe the metal burns, look at solid fuel rockets. They use aluminium to power them, some of them, so metal does burn. It does burn off into a gas. You can lose money. That's how my scrapyard quantifies it. I sell to them, therefore I've got no other reason to argue or to say any different. This is how I sell my stuff. This is why I don't strip VIR or vulcanised Indian rubber or flex or whatever it's called, because I only get number 2 prices for it. And seeing as this is 33% copper and they pay me 33% of the price of what I'd get for it when it was stripped, I don't see the point. They strip loads and loads of wire all the time. They've got the machines for it, they've already paid for it. They pay spot price on copper no matter what it is. So if copper is £3 for number 2, they pay £1 for this. They get the same amount of copper out of it, they make money on selling the PVC. That's how they get their profit. That's just how it is. Number 2 copper. Number 2 copper can be copper wire that is thicker than a paperclip, like this, but it's tin coated. They've got to take that tin coating off before they end up with proper copper, so they pay less because there's a process for them to take the coating off. Then you get this type of number 2 copper, which is, if you'd listen to what I just said, you'd know it's hair wire, it's number 2, that's all it is. Double D, we already know that. Well, this is number 2 because it's coated in shellac. It's got a lacquer coating on it because it originates from one of these. A solenoid, a motor, a coil of any kind is always number 2 copper. Doesn't matter the size of the windings, it's number 2 copper. The reason for that is it's always coated in a shellac coating. If it didn't have a shellac coating on it, it would short across the windings and it would no longer work. Any wire that comes in a coil or in a motor, no matter the thickness, is number 2 copper. Otherwise it wouldn't work in its application. It's as simple as that. For instance, the wire in this, very nice wire, but it's number 2. This is a degaussing cable from a TV. You get quite a lot of wire in there, but it's number 2. If it wasn't number 2, if it wasn't shellacked, the electricity wouldn't spin round it, it wouldn't do its job, it would just short across, and instead of the power going in there and then going all the way around loads and loads of times and coming back out, it would just go in and come straight back out. Number 2. bit of a tidy up. I'll be back with you. Try and remember where to put all this stuff back again. Number 2 copper pipe. This should be the other way around actually. Number 1 copper pipe. Doesn't matter on the size, doesn't matter whether it's 17mm, 22mm, 40mm, 60mm, whatever you want. Flour mill, I don't care. If it's clean, like this, just bare copper, number 1 copper. Also number 1 copper, but some places don't like the corrosion, because the corrosion is the copper turned to copper oxide, and when they smelt it, it will burn off. So some places will give you number 2 for this if they're very picky. My place doesn't. If your place is picky, get yourself a Brillo pad, rub it over a few times, it'll bring it up bright, it'll be number 1 copper. Again, some places will give you number 1 copper, number 2 copper, and bright and shiny. Bright and shiny being brand spanking new copper pipe. I think that's the case in America. Where I am, London, Herts, Essex, Borders, it's not the case. Number 1, number 2, that's all there is. Some smaller yards give you bright and shiny number 1, number 2, and then sell it onto the bigger yards. I go straight to the bigger yards because if you're taking anything over 100 kilos, you get trade price on it, which is usually an extra 5 to 10%. I've been going there for longer than most people have been working there. I've been going to these big yards for over 30 years. I've watched them change names, change directors, but the same people still work there, so I know them. I just go by what they say. I sell to them, they pay me on their basis, therefore I name everything on their basis. That's how it is. Number 2 copper pipe. There's 2 different kinds. You've got pipe with soldering in it, quite obviously here. Quite a bit of solder in that. That's lead, tin. Again, they've got to remove that. There's a process they have to go through to remove it, so they pay you less. The other type, chromed. You find this a lot in boilers, exposed tap pipes, etc, etc. If you cut through it, I don't know if you can see that, you'll see the copper colour on the inside. Again, the chromium plating, it's basically a nickel plating with a lacquer over the top. It's nasty stuff. It costs them more to remove this coating than it costs for them to remove this tin. Really, in my mind, this should be number 3 copper, but they pay me number 2, so I don't argue. They pay me more money. I don't care. This is what it's called in my yard. This is what I call it. This is what most big yards in my experience call it. I've probably been to 5 or 6 big major yards that clear from smaller yards. This is how all of them label the products they buy. I'm just going by that. So anyway, there you go. That's number 1, number 2 copper. Any more questions? Feel free to ask. Ta-da, peeps. Double rainbow. That's a big one. Oh, what's at the end of the rainbow? That's right, where the next recycling centre is. I'm there, dude.